Hey everybody, Gary here with Guitar Tricks, and in this video we're going to go over the differences between a steel string guitar and a nylon string guitar. So if you're just starting out on guitar, you might be wondering, what's the difference between a nylon and a steel string guitar? Which one's easier to play, and which guitar will give me the right sound for the style of music that I'd like to play? So I'm gonna go over all of those things, but before I do, please go ahead and click subscribe so that you get all the latest and greatest content from Guitar Tricks. All right, so being I'm holding a nylon string guitar right now, let's start with the nylon string. So this one I'm holding right now is borrowed from an organization called 1 Million Guitars, whose mission is to put 1 million of this exact model guitar into the hands of school-age children across the world who otherwise wouldn't be able to have access to an instrument like this. So super excited to be holding this model. And with that in mind, they decided to give children a nylon string guitar. And there's a few reasons for that. First of all, the founder of the organization, David Broza, plays a nylon string guitar, and this model is actually a very close replica of his guitar, but also because nylon string guitars in general are easier to play, especially on the fingertips, because the material of the strings, nylon, which is just plastic essentially, is softer than steel. The strings are wider, they're bigger, so pressing them down, you're not going to get that sharp indentation in your finger, and the string tension is also far less, the tension of the string as it's stretched over the bridge and over the nut. So that just makes it much easier to press down, and it's more of a pain-free experience, and students will find success much faster with pressing the strings down. Now the other thing that makes a nylon string guitar easier to play is that the spacing at the nut is wider. So the neck is wider here, and that means there's more space in between the strings. So when you go to play a chord, let's say like an A minor, you're less likely to have your fingers touching adjacent strings. You have more space to fit your fingertip in there. Now on some chords that makes life harder. Like let's say we're trying to play a G chord. The fact that the neck is a little wider means we have to stretch a little further. If it was thinner, our hand wouldn't have to stretch as far. So that's kind of a compromise there. In one sense, your fingers are less likely to touch adjacent strings. In another sense, the hand has to travel more distance to get from one side to the next. Another thing to keep in mind with nylon string guitars is that the neck in general is bigger all around. Not only is it usually wider from side to side, but it's usually also deeper, meaning that from the fretboard to the back of the neck is usually a little deeper. And even if it's not, just that overall size of the fingerboard with the thickness of the neck makes it feel like a bigger neck. However, there are plenty of models out there that are called hybrid models, meaning that they have a thinner nut width, like a steel string acoustic guitar, but with the nylon strings, so you get the best of both worlds. One last thing to keep in mind when you buy a nylon string guitar is that it takes a while for the strings to stretch out. You're not going to see this behind the scenes, but being that this is a new guitar, every 5 minutes I'm going to have to tune it for the purposes of this video for being in tune. When these strings are new, they could take, up to a week of playing consistently to get them to stretch out. They'll keep going flat. However, once they're totally stretched out, they could last you over a year. There's a player named Jose Gonzalez. He plays a nylon string acoustic guitar, plays hundreds of gigs each year. He says that he only changes his strings once a year. Whereas on a steel string, as we'll talk about later, you're not going to get that much time. They'll start to tarnish, get dirty, get rusty, collect all sorts of stuff on them. This tone will get really dull. Those you have to change pretty often. Even when you're not playing with them, they start to age. Another thing to keep in mind with a nylon string guitar is on a full scale model, the scale length, which means from the nut to the bridge, is bigger. So that means there's more spacing between the frets. But again, there's all sorts of scale lengths. You can get full scale, you can get 3/4 scale, you can get half scale. So there's always a solution to that. All right, so now I moved on to the steel string. So right away, this neck is much smaller and more comfortable in my hand. But like I said, that means my fingers have to be far more accurate to not touch adjacent strings when I'm playing chords. And even though the neck feels smaller, my fingertips feel that steel. If you've got really soft fingertips, it's gonna feel like pressing into a very dull razor blade. However, that goes away really quick with just a little bit of playing. On a consistent basis, your fingers are gonna start to get harder and you'll build calluses. And it'll get just hard enough to deal with whatever your normal amount of playing is. And then when you up level your playing and you start to play more, they'll start to peel again and then rebuild. So it's all about staying consistent. If you play consistently, you'll have just the right amount of hardness on your fingertips to resist that pain. So like I had said earlier, there's a thin nut width. To be technical, this is a 1 3/4 inch nut, and the one on this one is about 2 inches. So it's just a 1/4 of an inch difference, but that could really change the feel big time. But being it still is only a 1/4 of an inch, it's something you get used to rather quickly. And then to be more precise, the scale length on this instrument is 24 3/4 inches. And I believe this one is about 25.5 or 26 inches. So you get that extra 1.5 inches on a full-size nylon string that's going to be spread throughout the instrument. Now, one other thing to talk about with playability that I didn't mention with the nylon string guitar is something called the fretboard radius. So on a steel string and electric guitar, the radius of the fretboard, meaning the amount of curvature, could be anywhere between 7.5 inches radius to 16 inches radius. On this one, it's 12 inches. So what that means is imagine a 12-inch circle and the roundness of that circle. Now, the fretboard follows that roundness of 12 inches. So it's very subtle, but if you look at it at this angle, if you take your guitar and look, you'll see that curvature. Now, this curvature can make bar chords a little more easy. Just makes chords in general a little easier because your fingers can remain a little curved. On a nylon string, however, there is no radius. It's absolutely flat. Sometimes it almost seems like it's concave the other direction, but it's absolutely flat. And that means when you play bar chords, your finger has to be totally flat. However, being the strings are much softer, it doesn't feel as uncomfortable because they're easier to press down. And obviously also with bar chords on a nylon string guitar, we've got more length to cover across the entire fretboard. So again, each has their advantage and disadvantage. All right, let's talk about tone. So nylon string guitars have been made for a really long time. They're used generally to play classical guitar, flamenco guitar from Spain. It's an older design, and obviously it works good in those styles, which are generally more finger style. You know, this whole... Also popular in bossa nova, more this style. Popular in jazz. Regular finger style. But then again, even the country star Willie Nelson played a nylon string acoustic guitar, still does to this day, same exact model, calls it Trigger. And he played chords most of the time. So the point is, there really are no rules. You can play any style of music you want on a nylon string acoustic guitar. You don't have to play classical or flamenco or jazz. You can play whatever you want. All right, let's check out the steel string. So steel string acoustic guitars really got popularized as part of an ensemble where you got other people singing and doing other stuff because they really cut through the mix, especially when you use that pick to to kind of play rhythm guitar. So the history of the nylon string acoustic guitar was not as much as a rhythm instrument. It was more playing melodies, playing lead ideas, playing fingerstyle, playing those kind of guitar arrangements, where the steel string guitar functions really well as just a rhythm instrument, where you're just kind of like a drummer with chords. You know, you're just banging on those chords. So steel string's really gonna cut through for that purpose. That being said, there's so many people that play fingerstyle acoustic. All right, everybody, I hope after watching this video, you can now see and hear and tell the difference between a nylon string acoustic guitar and a steel string acoustic guitar. As you can see, both have their advantages and disadvantages, and they both have a very different sound, but after all said and done, it's personal preference. If you want to learn more about playing guitar, head over to guitartricks.com. If you want to see more videos like this, please subscribe, and I will see you in the next lesson. Happy playing.